All right, so we're going to do the third shape in our monochromatic still life. For this one, we're going to do a cylinder. And what I'm hoping that people are noticing as you're working on these is that there is a lot of similarity between the steps. So, and I think we had said that initially in class was, if as long as the process or the steps are similar, you can paint just about anything you want. Obviously, we're just starting with easier shapes, things that we don't have to, that aren't super, super technical, just to kind of get down the whole idea of what is the process or what are the steps that you go through to do this, okay? So again, I've got my mid-range. Now on my big painting, I didn't do a cylinder, so this is on a separate piece of paper. So we're going to have a different discussion about the background. But I'm just starting with my mid color and then water. Okay, because I don't want this to be super duper thick. Like I don't want to make that background go, or the underpainting go away. I don't want to just totally cover it over, which you could legitimately do. We want to be able to see through it. We want there to be some layering there. So my first thing, just because I like to kind of do my edges first and then know where I'm going to stop. So I like to stop down there at the bottom, only because the shadow and the underpainting are very, very similar in value. So I want to know where this is going to end, where my cylinder is going to end. So when we drew the cylinder, the thing that I asked people to notice was it's a rectangle with a smiley face. And then in this situation, we can also see the lid. So in that case, it acts like a rectangle or a cube, because now we've got the top surface, the shadow, and then the highlight or the side that the light is hitting. So first step, that mid-range color, and I've been kind of messing around between these two, is going to go over everything like a first coat. And again, any of you guys that are doing the blue or the purple, most likely what you're going to find is that color, your pure color on top of the underpainting will look great, because what it's going to do is it's going to tint that color. So instead of it just being a bold blue or a purple, it's now going to be a deeper color because you're going to be able to see that dark underpainting through it. Okay? Since I'm doing the experiment with the gray, I'm having to make a lot more colors. Not a problem. But when you guys are doing these with the red, the blue, the green, the purple, you're probably going to get a little bit of a different result, okay? So we don't want to get too messy. We don't want to get too crazy. Try to always be a little bit under control when we're doing this. And again, I'm coming over here to do my edges. So the only thing in this one, because it's on a separate piece of paper, we're not going to have as many issues with the background because it's not part of another composition. So that won't be as big of a discussion as when we do the sphere, because the sphere is on my other paper. So that sphere kind of, they all have to play nice together. They all have to hang out and kind of be in the same space. So there might be some things that are changed or altered within the background so that stuff works, okay? So I'm just trying to very neatly get a first coat on this cylinder, and enough water that I can thin out a little bit of the color over here near the underpainting. But like I have found in all the shapes that I've done, I'm having to go back and darken the shadow side because what I kind of picked for a mid color is a little bit light. So I don't want to have that be, because now, so I just covered it, and exactly, now it's covered and there's no more shadow anymore. So I'm just going to fix this side over here, make sure that it's got a second coat of paint over here. Now, when we're trying to blend something, and that's why we kind of grouped the cone and the cylinder together, because we've got to blend this from dark to light. Both of the paints have to be wet. So that's going to be the biggest thing, is I have to go back and make this side darker, and to do that and try to blend it in over here, both of those guys are going to have to be wet for it to work back and forth. So a lot of times, and especially when we're in class, I always try to get folks to do that blending before they leave, because if something dries and it still is like there's a hard line there, it's almost like you have to repaint the whole thing. Because what will end up happening is you end up with this hard line, and now the paint's dry, and it's very, very, very hard to try to blend that. So you're still going to end up painting over the top of it anyway. All right, so let's see what this color looks like. So we had before a shadow that looked a lot like this. So obviously, I'm still way too light. So I need something that looks a lot more like a color you might call charcoal to do that shadow side. And you'll find too that it's really good to roll your brush over, because the paint will collect way up here. And I will show you how we're going to distinguish between the bottom of this and the shadow once we get down to that point. So I'm just going to put this darker charcoal back on the shadowy side of this cylinder. But we, like I said, we need both sides to be wet anyway to do any kind of blending. Now, because this is much darker, I got to be careful up here on the lid and just make sure that I define that line and don't put anything up here, because that's got to be a light color, right? That's got to be more toward the end of the tints because the light is hitting it. Okay. And again, anytime your paint starts to feel sticky, just add some water to it. But again, don't go crazy. Don't do something like is going to make a puddle. Just enough to get it to move. Okay. Now, I'd never go halfway on an object, because that to me seems weird. I think that this color is going to exist more really far to this side, that really, really dark color. So I'm going to wipe my brush off, because now I've got this crazy dark line. But at least the good thing is that this paint is a little bit wet, and we made a color that I thought was going to be my shadow, but it was way too light. So now I've got two different wet paints here that I can kind of make this line chill out. Okay, so the first step would be to apply the paint. And I just happen to have made another color that's going to be a nice transition over. So I'm going to add that in. A little bit like a stripe. And I know I'm making it look really precise over here, but it's just, I'm just neatly putting it on. Okay. Now, these two guys are very wet, so I'm going to work on that first. So, like I've showed you before, what I normally do is I paint, a piece of paper. I go like this to wipe my brush off. Just so that I can, again, do the dry brush technique, because I don't want to add any more paint to this. What I want to try to do now, and I'm going to go dark into the light. So I'm going to start over here and pull it back this way. Okay, so I'm going to go here. And now I'm getting a little sticky just because the paint's been out a little bit. Tiny bit of water. Not like your whole brush dipped in water. Tiny, tiny bit of water. Because I want this to all blend in. Okay. And when you get a lot of these brush marks, like you can see that's going on right now, it's really because the paint is wet. Instead of it being a little more tacky and us being able to fade it, it just still has a lot of water in it. Okay. So the thing I'm always doing is that I'm always coming back over here, to the paper towel, and I'm going to paint with it to get it dried off. And then I'm going to come back over here with no paint. And the fact that the paint is getting a little bit dry because it's sitting out here, we should be able to pull it across. Because what I'm worried about is just making this side look smooth. I'm not over here yet. So I'm just working on this. Trying to deepen up that side. Go back down here, see what's happening. And if you're going to try to do something as big of an object as this one is, because I drew it as a demonstration, it's a lot bigger than the ones that are in our project. So try to move around your object with a little sense of urgency, because what will end up happening is the paint could dry if you ignore it, and you may not have messed with it, and then now you've got like this weird funky line going on. Okay. So the only thing that I'm going to do now, just because I notice it, I'm going to take some of this darker color and I'm going to come back over here and just add it back in on the edges, because I don't want to lose that contrast. And I'm not using a lot of paint because I don't want a big sloppy mess that I'm trying to blend. I just want to make that side be a little bit darker. So only just the little strip at the end, but not a strip that looks like a stripe. So I'm using very, very little paint. And I'm going to, whatever's on my brush, I'm going to go ahead and put it on here. But then I already know I have too much paint on it, so I'm going to come over here and wipe my brush off. And then come back with it dry. And just soften up this edge where I just added that dark color back in. So again, a lot of going back and forth. I'm going to keep that a little bit darker. Now I need a little bit more paint to keep coming up here with it. Now, sometimes I'll get people that are really observant and they'll say, well, geez, if the light's up here, don't you think some of that light will spill over the edge? Yeah, I do. We have nothing right now that we're looking at. We're kind of doing this from what we think should happen. So absolutely, if you think on yours that the top, this area up here would generally get a little bit lighter, you're probably right. If we were to put a light on something and really critically look at it, I would probably agree with you that there would be a lighter version kind of spilling over the edge. Okay. All right, so that's looking pretty good on that side. So now we want to go ahead and we want to make sure that we can fade this into this. This is going to be our lightest color over here. So I think we're going to have to make that next transition color, because the one that I had was really, really, really light. It was kind of more like what the lid should look like. So if I wanted to, because there's really no order to this, I could go ahead and neaten up the top over here with this much, much lighter color. And for right now, I'm just going to leave this as a single color. I'm not going to worry about fading it or, you know, changing the value of it. I'm okay if that's just a lighter color up there. I don't think it's going to cause a problem. So I'm just going to add this in over here. Now, one thing that we might talk about doing is adding actual white to this edge later, but that would be later down the road. I wouldn't even worry about doing it right now. All right, so let's see what this color looks like when we put it on here. Not too bad, I like that. Okay, so again, this seam in between those two colors needs to get repainted. And I think my first go over with this was a little messy. So it's totally okay that I've got to go back and kind of neaten this up. I'm gonna add a little bit of water. Okay. Now I do still have some of that darker color there if I do need it. I think I need a new paper towel now. I'm going to grab a new paper towel to wipe what I'm doing here. Okay. And then I'm going to actually go this way this time. Instead of left and right, I'm going to go right up the middle and try to pull some of that lighter color into that dark. I'm going to actually come all the way back over here. And if you do get something weird on your brush that isn't totally mixed, just keep painting with it. See if you can move it around a little bit. Okay, so I need a tiny bit of water to help blend this a little bit better. Now, I don't want to get too crazy and get too far this way with that super light color. So I'm going to come in here and grab a little bit of dark. Not too much though. And kind of push some of that back. Okay. I have enough paint, so I'm going to clean off my brush. Let's see if I can get this to fade. So now I'm kind of pulling the dark back. And then, only because I keep going to the exact same place, I'm going to change direction just to get rid of those marks I was making. Okay, so see now how the bottom is kind of moving over? That looks good. But now we need more paint up here, so we can do the top half. Okay, so again, this is going to be real close to that lid color. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of get rid of my paint. I'm going to go to water. We're here in the middle. Now, does it need to be a perfectly straight line? No. Because remember, any of you that watched the cone already, that kind of curved around. It's totally okay if this curves a little bit as far as showing where the shadow goes. Okay. So now it's kind of looking a little bit better as far as the blending and it going from dark to light. What I am definitely going to do, because these colors are super close, I'm just going to take the paint that's on my brush, add some white to it, and I'm going to like make a new color over here. Because I don't want it bright white, because that's going to look weird. But this color that we've been using is way too close. And I want there to be some kind of separation between the two of these guys. So I think the best choice is going to be to add some lighter color to the lid. Because I put on the one color and I was like, okay, that's a good color for the lid. But now that I've done the side, now it looks weird. And it looks like, you know, there's no three-dimensionality to it. There's no depth to it. So I'm going to put this on here. I'm going to get rid of what's on my brush. So I'm going to paint over here and get rid of it. And then we're going to go ahead and blend in this much brighter color kind of across the top. Drag it out just to let it blend in. I might have to change my hand here a little bit just to get it to come over here, because I'm a flat brush person. I like flat brushes the best for everything. Very, very rarely will I use a round brush, even if it comes to a point. Okay. So now we've got the real light kind of fading into dark. We've got the highlight here, a little bit dark, and then darkness down here. So the last thing that I want to do to this is I just want to make the shadow at the bottom be a little bit more defined. So I'm going to take a little bit of black paint and kind of add it to some of this stuff I've got going on down here in the middle. Because down here is already pretty dark, but it's really hard to see between the shape and the shadow that we did. So I'm going to come in here. Let's make sure, I gotta check this and make sure it's dark. So I'm gonna go right up to the edge here. With this darker color. Just so there's a definite separation between everybody here. And then since this is nice and wet, let's see if we can just drag this out here into the shadow. And have it just sort of run out, just sort of fade out. Okay. So now we've got a more of a crisp looking shadow. And we can certainly straighten out the edges a little bit. And then that way now we've got a much, much darker shadow behind this, which I think is a little better look to it, okay? So very much more dramatic shadow. Now, the one thing that I'm not gonna finish on this is gonna be the background for it. Because we've had discussions about backgrounds on the other two objects that are actually on the painting that we're working on. So I'm not really going to add that to it, but just know that it's going to have to be something much, much lighter to stand out from this. You know, so if I was going to add to it, my background would have to be, you know, more like this kind of a color, which actually almost looks like the paper color anyway. Okay, so I would need this color up against it here, where probably that line that we drew on our paper that's the fake horizon line would probably stop it right there. Okay, and then our background color, our color up at the top, we gotta be careful about it because this is kind of dark over here. And I know, same thing we kind of did down here with the shadow, we did on the cone to make the edge of the cone stand out from the background a little bit. So that means that, you know, on this side, no problem because, right, we've got our highlight. So if we were going to put, you know, a super dark color like this up against the light, that's awesome. I mean, that's exactly what we want. The question's going to be once you get around the other side, does it still look great? Okay. So like that would be my top. And then that lighter color would be the color on the bottom. If this was just a standalone, you know, type of item, which it is right now. I mean, it's right. It just happens to be next to, on the paper, a sphere, but we're just treating it like it's a standalone, just to do the demo on this, on how to paint the cylinder. Okay, doesn't it look weird though without putting it over here? Looks totally weird. So now I have to turn it and do it. Hold on. All right, so let's just add some of that to this side. Okay, and that seems to be much, much darker, so I think it's fine. Okay, so if we turn that, then that definitely looks much better, just throwing in the dark on both sides of it. But again, you may have to make adjustments based on your painting and, you know, depending upon what you've already chosen for different values. So that's going to be the question for you on this. All right. So that is some techniques to do the cylinder. Again, you're probably noticing the techniques are very similar between the first steps and then moving into it. Okay. So, but I think it's more helpful to see the whole process. So that's why we're going to the trouble of like, well, let's go step by step and see how this happens. And I think that's been helpful from the folks that have told me. Seeing how it's done has been a big help. All right. So Marshall on, and video number 4 will be the sphere.